welcome to this episode of Becoming a Fulfillionaire. Today's guest is Dr. Neeta Bhushan.
Wow.
She is also the host of The Brave Table. She is on her fourth book, is that correct?
Yes.
And you just finished writing it to go off to the editing sphere, if you will, the whole world of wizarding and editing, right?
That's right.
And she is currently a mama of two. And she's married to another good friend of mine, Ajit, and we're going to get into all sorts of interesting stories today. Neeta's just got a whole serial entrepreneur history and has quite the emotional history that we'll dig into and just see what kind of wisdoms we can pull out. So my number one question to get started here, walk me through the earliest age you can remember wanting to be an author.
Ooh, okay. So I'd probably say when I was little, I totally wanted to be an artist, like a painter. So authorship was not even in the realm until I was like a full adult. And so, yeah, but when I was a little girl, I always remembered like coming home from school. I remember being like 7 years old and just like I had a whole little, one of those like paint sets that like, they have like the little palette. I get them for Ari now, but like they have the little palette and you have like the colors and there's like a tiny little, paintbrush. And then I had those, it was like an easel, but then you had those, like the Cinderella kind of like blank sheets. And every single day after school, like every area was like open for color. And so I would come back home and do my little painting and show it to my dad. And he would crush my dreams every time.
Oh.
Yeah.
Pobrecita.
And he was like, well, it was just like, okay, yeah, this is great, but you're going to study and you're going to do your math homework.
What age range was this through where you were bringing paintings back?
Oh, yeah. This is totally the first grade. I totally remember. It was age like 7 till I want to say 10. So I had a love of arts and, just kind of diving into things that were not studies potentially. So yeah, but coming from like an Indian Filipino household, we had the arts because I was in a lot of these extracurricular activities. So we would do like Hawaiian dance. I grew up on Hawaiian dance and Indian dance and Filipino dance. Like that's kind of what you did when you were Filipino. You had to do Hawaiian dance because it's just part of the culture. But my dad wanted us to also learn like classical Indian dance, Punjabi dance. So dance was a big thing because you had to perform when you saw the other cousins. And the other cousins usually were singing or playing piano, which I did all of that, not the singing part. But it was, to have this like sort of expression, and you had to be really good at school. Yes.
Now, was this something where, and just as a curiosity, I noticed there's like two paths that people take when there's stuff like this with parents. Either one, they become resentful and really dislike all those things, or they become like a super achiever and it becomes like a happiness outlet for the rest of their life.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, it was definitely, it was an outlet because I remember then going into high school and there was International Day. So my first year of high school, I went to an all-girl Catholic school. It was I was not happy. I hated it. I wanted to go where all of my friends were going, which was Lane Tech. But my mom got really sick and she had cancer. And so I had to go where everybody wanted me to go, which was this like very religious Catholic school. Like the nuns were teaching. It was very strict.
When you said you had to go, what does that mean?
I mean, it was so because we lived in the city of Chicago, in order to go to one of those, I guess you can say, schools that you had to test into because we were in the inner city, if you can imagine that. Not the inner city, but I guess it's easier to say the inner city because the magnet schools and the top echelon of the schools you had to get into. Otherwise, you'd go to private school. So because for whatever reason, I didn't get into my top tier schools that would be good enough for my parents, they're like, we're going to put you in private school. And so I was so sad. It was like, I was so heartbroken because everyone else got into those top tier schools, which was Lane Tech and Whitney Young at the time. And they're like, nope, you're going to go to this all-girl private school run by the nuns. And I was so devastated, but also my mom was sick. And so it was like her wish for me to get educated by the Jesuits because she was like Catholic.
So when you say had to,
Yes.
you really meant societally, culturally, familially had to.
Yes.
Or else the amount of shame and guilt laid on you would have been so thick.
Yes. And actually, I kind of did get my way, though, because in the following year, my mom did get really sick where my parents couldn't afford to pay the tuition to go to this private school. So in some weird way, I, got...
Don't use the word manifest.
Right? I kind of manifested my way back into the school I'd always wanted to go to. But segueing into, International Day and dance, that's really what I took into even the school that I didn't really like, because I knew I could perform. I knew that dancing was then an outlet because it's just a cultural thing. You kind of go into dance when you were younger, and then you're either practicing or performing on the weekends, or you're, doing these sort of showcases. Piano was another thing. So I had my outlets of creative expression in a way, but I always knew that my happy place then, going to the school that I wanted to go to, which was Lane Tech, it was a diverse, huge melting pot. There was 1,000 kids. It was in the city. I mean, so many different cultures. And we had this International Day where you had the Cambodian club, you had the Vietnamese club, you had the Hawaiian club, you had the Indian club, you had the Pakistani club, you had the Mexican club. I mean, Guatemalan, like every single culture was represented. And honestly, white was the minority because we had just such a array of culture. And this is what you looked forward to every year. And people would come from all over just to see all of these cultural dances. And yeah, that was my creative outlet and expression.
Now, did you continue that creative expression into medical school and, dentist school, right?
So, in a way, yes, because you would always perform on friends' weddings. And that was a thing because the Indian weddings is huge. And it's kind of like, okay, I feel like a lot of us go through the years of all of the, the dance routines and everything only to create like a medley of songs for the friends, or, the friends' wedding or a relative's wedding, but it's really part of South Asian culture. So yeah.
Now, how did you make the decision to go to dental school? Like, I'm like, who I know and who that person must have been are very different people. What was that decision making process like?
Yeah. So to tell you that story, I'd have to go back into kind of like my years in high school. So when my mom was really sick with cancer, and she had breast cancer, and she had it when I was 10, and, I became the caretaker of the home. I was raising my 2 younger brothers at the time, and it was really devastating for my Indian father, who was seemingly, strict from the outside. He was very protective of his family, but didn't really know how to emotionally regulate and even cope with the fact that his wife could be dying. And we had a lot of financial issues at the time, and my dad was like, okay, you can get a job. And so one of my first jobs, it was at a dental office on Saturdays. And I would be working 3 jobs during that time in high school. But one of them, it was always a staple. It was like Saturday mornings, I'm going to work for, and you guys, this is like so crazy. Shout out to Dr. Horrible. That was his name.
Can we also just have a shout out to I'm sorry for middle school. I'm really sorry about that for whenever he had that.
Seriously. Yeah. Horrible. It was, so we would pronounce it horball because you wouldn't want new patients to get super scared that this, he's a horrible dentist. Like, what?
So never mind. Shout out to his entire life. I'm sorry.
Well, he also has kids, so and his daughter took over his practice. Shout out to her, Kirsten.
That's totally like either he's a monk and has just accepted that, or maybe illegally change it.
He didn't know, and he came from a lineage of dentists. So his mom was a dentist, and it's crazy, but Dr. Horrible, yeah. And you can't not, it's like it's like horrible. Anyways, he was the nicest man. He literally became my mentor. Started working for him at 15 years old. And this is at a time where I was like this rebellious teenager. So I would want to go out with my friends on Saturday night. And Dr. Horrible would hear, because he also had a daughter about my age, he would hear these like conversations that I'm having in between, like patients are, I have to like get the patients, seat them in the chair. I don't even know how he had me working for him as like a teenager, but I'm like fighting with my dad, and I'm like, I'm gonna go to the party after work today. And then he was like, no, you're not, you're gonna see your mom in the hospital. And so it was like all these things, but I would set up the trays for him. I would answer the phone calls, and I would book appointments for people. So what I recognized during that time was even though I was going through really hard turmoil, having to subconsciously kind of go through the fact that I would probably be losing my mom because she was getting so sick. And I was acting out with my father, not wanting to. He was trying to control me and protect me because he was also going through a loss. We were all grieving. But I saw this outlet where I'm like, okay, these patients are coming in for a root canal on a Saturday or getting their crown done on a Saturday, and I'm answering their phone, seating them in their chair. And here I am getting this like whiff of like, oh, I'm important in a different way. I can make people laugh. I can entertain them. And I don't have to sit in my like the sadness of whatever was transpiring and the things that I couldn't control. Couldn't control that my dad was strict. Couldn't control that my mom was kind of nearing her end of life. I didn't even want to look into that. But what I could control is, okay, how I was bantering with Dr. Horrible and being his assistant and learning all the things about the mouth and helping the psychology of people coming into the office feel better about themselves and like literally instantly change their experience of being at a dental office on a Saturday morning. Because who would want to ever be there on a Saturday morning? Let's be honest. So segueing that was my first and longest position because it was a Saturday job. Most friends would probably be working at the mall or something like that. I chose to be very responsible and do that. So literally for years, starting at 15 years old, that was my routine for probably, I want to say, a decade. I worked for him until I worked for him through college. Yes. And then it was right when I got into dental school. So he was the impetus for everything. I wanted to have flexibility. I was really good with my hands. I used to play the piano for 10 years. Don't ask me to play now because I only memorized everything because that's what a good student does, right? And of course, merging my creativity with my hands because I did love art. That was kind of the next step to go into dentistry. And I loved making people feel really good. So I had that sort of personality, but I started that whole process because of, thank you, Dr. Horrible. Like literally that was my first initiation into what would be, entrepreneurship.
If you could just quickly drop a wisdom bomb on me, what do you think was the biggest? I always say, like, when we have mentors in life, there's certain attributes or characteristics we take away from them that mean a lot to us. And we're like, oh, I'm going to be like blank in this way. What do you think you took from 10 years working with this person and like looking up to them?
Yeah, I think it was, for me, it always meant that it was a safe space and a safe place to be myself when everything kind of in my world was just like trauma, losing my mom, then a year later losing my brother, and that was unexpected completely, he had been through some of those really dark days and without judgment. Like, I feel like I remember leaving his office, like unlocked over the weekend, you know, probably going off with the boyfriend or whoever I was dating at the time. There was never any judgment. He always, and I think he was just the opposite of my father, because my father was like very Punjabi, very loud, always like screaming, yelling, and to his benefit and to his, you know, to just honor his legacy, he was a great father. But I think also he had just so much stress and overwhelm and angst with him. So he wanted to protect me as much as he could. And I'm like trying to get as much freedom, because here I am feeling like I have to take care of the entire family, hold up everybody. But then on Saturday mornings, I would go into this office and just hang out with patients and make them feel good, make them feel heard, make them feel seen, make them feel loved in a way where they didn't know what I was going through and there was no judgment. And I feel like Dr. Horrible was like the overseer of that, where it was like, come as you are welcome, you are appreciated.
It's like a secondary father figure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because there was no judgment, you know, it was full acceptance. And not even asking if I was even going to go into dentistry. It was just kind of like this, it almost felt like the arms were just wide open. Whereas with my father, it was expected that I would be a doctor, dentist, lawyer, engineer. I mean, mostly, you know, doctor, medical profession. So that was a huge, I would say, definitely foray into my deciding factor of dentistry.
So I have a huge question for you that I hope you can answer.
Yeah.
So in this respect, you've had at minimum 3 parents, at least parental figures in your life, and you have currently 2 kids. What's your, in one paragraph, philosophy of how you're going to parent them at that age? If you could look into that now and say, like, what's the harmony that you've formed between those 3 figures?
So, and I have to say this, preface this too, because I would even say that I've had, you know, several parental figures, because even during the time when my parents were going through the roughest moments in their life, because then my mom actually passed of cancer when I was 16. My brother passed a year later. And so, you know, we had to have my external family step in. So my grandmother stepped in. She's very maternal, and she's like the matriarch of our family. My mom's mom. My grandmother's sister also stepped in, also like fierce Leo, and very much like, they were like the Filipino lions, the lionesses in our family. So they like held everyone together. So my aunt, or my grandmother's sister, was the one who essentially was at my mom's bedside while she was like dying in her last days. And I always looked up to my grandmother and my aunt, my mom's aunt, or my grandmother's sister, because they exuded not only so much in terms of female entrepreneurship. Like my grandmother she was a teacher, but she also had various, you know, passions that she loved. But during our deepest, darkest times, they raised us. On top of that, then you have my dad's sister, who also stepped in when my dad then got diagnosed of cancer and then passed, 10 months later. So this all happened all before I was 19. Yeah, so when I say I've been raised by full matriarchs on both sides of my family, and then having Dr. Horrible being, you know, such a great mentor in my life, I've been so lucky and blessed to have all of these women, and it really, you know, takes a village to raise kids, especially, you know, I was at a prime stage of my life. I was a teenager. Like going through the traumas and the tragedies that I went through, literally when everything was going down, I feel like something was happening from the age that I was 10 until 19. And so what I would say, which is so beautiful now coming back full circle, having my own kids and having a daughter and a son.
So far.
So far, yes.
Hi, Ajit.
But I think that, it really goes into having the discussion and really the acceptance of, you know what, this is your life, and I'm going to accept you for everything that you want to do, experience, and explore, and keep discovering yourself, So I think that's the lens that now I get to choose those types of experiences. Because even with him, I see how my bua, he's only 3, but my bua is my dad's sister, who you've met many times. And so the way she parents is kind of like, oh, I remember, like, if my dad would be here, he'd probably say something like that. Because he'll say, like, oh, God, don't do that. Don't touch that. You're going to fall. You're going to break your head. You're going to do. And for me, I'm like, yes, and you're probably going to fall. You might hurt your head. And also, well, what would happen if I don't, like, chime in right away? Simply because now I'm so cognizant of, okay, well, my parents weren't there to fully support all of the grit and the resilience that I had to go through in my, kind of adolescent life. But also, I think there is a way where we can just accept and see the beauty of our kids trying to make the best decisions for themselves and not fully helicopter over them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So I feel like there's a lot of stuff I want to pull out, because we have pretty opposite experiences with grief, where a lot of mine came later in life, and I feel like I haven't developed the skills to deal with that very well. And you've had such a long time with this to be able to practice and study, and you had to go through a lot of it. So would you say, when your mom was the first one that passed, did you deal with that right away, or was that something that you had to unpack later?
So I think that, grief, and I've been on many panels and discussions about grief. I'm not the grief queen. I'm not gonna, take that. However, obviously I have a lot of experience around grief, of course. And I think that, it never stops. And I think for me that because a lot of grief happened so fast, I had sudden death a year later. And with my mom, this was kind of like the slow death of grief, because you're kind of thinking from 10 to then, she was in remission when I was 14. And then when I was like a year later, it came back. Essentially, no, she was in remission from 10 to 14. She had it when I was 10, had it again at 14. And then she, for those 2 years, she just, it spread to everywhere. And I think that when you see someone that was completely and fully abled, because many of our listeners probably have, elderly parents or parents that are aging or going through something. And, cancer is one of those things where it affects a lot of people. And, there is something to be said about nothing can prepare you for somebody transitioning, no matter what the age. And I was really young, and I remember praying constantly of, oh, I wish she could just make it until my junior prom. I wish she could just see me for my junior prom. And, I was very much in that victim mode of like, oh, why is this happening to me? All of these things. I think our community, and that's the biggest thing about grief, is being enveloped in a supportive environment of love and support. And that's all we knew how to do. My dad was such a great proponent. He was traditional in one sense, but maybe subconsciously he knew that he wasn't going to be around for that much longer, because he had us go into talk therapy, which honestly, looking back, it wasn't, shout out to everybody who's gone through talk therapy. I think that if I were to do it again, I would do it differently. However, we did talk therapy. We went to workshops where we had to bang things and throw things on the floor, those emotional release workshops. Back in the day, it wasn't really called that. I can't recall what it was actually called, but we even went through grief counseling as a kid where you'd write, letters. I remember doing this heavily when my brother, DJ, passed away, because it was such a shock to our system. And it was so shocking. No one had the words to even console us. No one even knew like what to say, especially having lost my mom a year before. So a lot of that early unpacking that grief in the traditional talk therapy sense we had. And also my coping mechanism became overwork, overdrive, because that's what my dad, he was like, okay, this thing is too big to bear. You're going to do well in school. Focus on your studies. And honestly, that's really, and especially when things got really tough. I remember when my brother passed away, it was, during the time of early decision making and applying to universities. And I applied to all these places because I thought I was going to leave Chicago completely. And this happened, and I knew in my gut, like my heart sank. I'm like, there's no way. I cannot leave my dad and my brother. There's no way. So putting those dreams aside, I'm like, okay, I'm going to suck it up. Compartmentalize whatever that is, put it in a box, cover it up, pack it with really good wrapping paper, and I'm going to focus. And that became my internal mantra. Like, I'm going to get us out of this really dark, dark tunnel that we're in. And I honestly didn't get to really unpack a lot of that grief until then, a decade later, when I would leave my first marriage.
Whoa, what a transition there. Okay. We're going to dig into that. Why was it then? Why? I know that's going to get tough, but it's going to get tough for me to hear this story because I know you so well. But did all of that grief come like exploding out during that time?
I think for me, I really longed to recreate a family that I lost. That was the whole impetus, I started a nonprofit called Independent Awakening that championed self-confidence and self-worth in women after this whole process. And kind of looking back, and what a lot of young women get into is we don't see the self-worth in ourselves. So we find it in people who think that they could give us that self-worth. They could give us that, oh, okay, I'm going to try to fix that person. I'm going to try to correct the flaws in somebody else because I don't love myself enough to focus on myself. I'm going to focus everything to make everybody else happy. And so, that white knight syndrome or the martyr syndrome or the giver, all of those kind of archetypes, that's really, or the Mother Teresa, that's really who I was. I was taught at a very early age, sacrifice yourself because your happiness is dependent on making other people happy, making your mom happy while she's, in the ICU room with the tubes down her throat and dancing or performing just so that she can smile on her face. And then, getting into, all the accolades to make my father proud while seeing him also on his deathbed. And then fast forward, so all of the things that I'd ever done was, okay, to have this approval, this validation from the ghosts of my parents, my parents. And so that then translated to, okay, men see me, they value me in this way, and they can also take that away from me in the ways of psychological abuse, emotional abuse, and even physical abuse. And so anyone who is in a toxic relationship or finds themselves in an abusive relationship where your needs are not being met, where you feel gaslit, where you feel that you are not acknowledged, these are all red flag signs. And for me, I always thought, oh, okay, but I can fix him. I've been through a lot. I could fix him. I know what that's like. I could totally fix him. Instead of looking at myself and saying, ooh, there are parts of myself that need to heal. Why am I trying to fix everybody else and not me? And there was a lot of ego and pride there too. I didn't want anybody to know that I was going through this thing in silence. And I honestly didn't know that I was in such grave danger until I actually was.
Wow. You mentioned something in that story where you said you were trying to like appease the ghosts of your parents. At this point, do you have a relationship with them in some way?
I do. Yeah. It's beautiful. It was a plant medicine journey, a psychedelic experience that truly kicked off this awakening for me in a very different light. It would kick off me leaving dentistry. And it was at a point where this was kind of post, I had the courage I had a dark night of the soul and had the courage to leave my tumultuous marriage. It was December 31st, 2010? 2011? 2011. Yes. 10 years ago. 10 years ago. While everybody was like celebrating New Year's Eve and I'm kind of like having this existential crisis, like I do not want to stay where I'm at right now. And I was definitely awakened to so many things happening. And that's when I realized I have to fully leave. And I was, emotionally distressed. I was mentally not myself, spiritually dead. And yet I had all of these trappings of external success that everybody would totally want. I was not a fulfillionaire. And so during this healing process where I finally hit rock bottom in many ways, it was a full initiation of, okay, I'm just going to say yes to everything. I'm going to say yes to all of the healing. I'm going to say yes to whatever anybody brings to me, whether it's the form of books, experiences, yoga retreats, breath work, like anything and everything. I'm going to just dive right in. So then fast forward to in my process of saying yes to all of these different things, there was this 3-day ayahuasca, drop in. And I had been hearing about ayahuasca and Aya for a very long time. It's probably like 3 years into my healing journey and literally experiencing, all non-traditional forms of therapy, from somatic expression to tapping to EMDR, like just everything. And then, Aya starts showing up in my dreams, documentaries. I was still a practicing dentist, so patients were even coming and just talking to me about it. And so I was hearing it from all of these different places. And so I was like, okay. And there was a friend who was like, you know what? Yeah, we do this 3-day thing. It's not in the jungle. It's not in the Amazon. It's in Toronto. So, and me living in Chicago at the time, I was like, okay, I will, sure, I'll say yes, I'll go. So I was a little skeptical, but then I ended up kind of just submitting and surrendering to the entire experience. And this was also kind of after my first Burning Man experience as well. So I was very familiar with some of the plant medicines, but I had never been exposed to ayahuasca. And so in that 3-day journey, I would die many ego deaths. I would ask so many questions that my ego and my heart was so afraid to ask, which was around, are you really supposed to be doing dentistry? Like, because I had already started my nonprofit and I started to do speaking gigs, kind of a lot along the lines of my story in so many different ways. And I started doing a lot more outreach and, with universities and colleges, just with women and girls, that my pull was being pulled elsewhere. Yet I didn't know what that next chapter was going to look like. I didn't know it could look like coaching or anything else, or even mentorship or angel investing. Didn't know any of those things until I started asking those questions, like at this not yoga, but at the ayahuasca retreat. And so the second day, I literally had a vision of, it was like I was in a ditch, and it was a very dark vision. And this was kind of like the ego death. And the vision was, there was a brown bag over my head, and this got really dark. And basically there was kind of like the spirit or person in kind of like this very dark garment, and has a gun towards my head. And I'm literally kneeling, and this person's behind me. And it was literally, okay, what are you so afraid of? Stepping into everything that you've known for so long, what are you so afraid of? And those fears that I reconciled in that night was, I'm afraid I'm going to let my family down, my parents down, kind of everybody who has seen me as a successful cosmetic dentist with this really lively practice, grew it and all of the things, shaped so many people's lives, but I knew that that wasn't really my core of what I could see myself 3 years from that point. I just didn't know what the other alternative was. And then the next day, day 3 of the ayahuasca experience, and for those of you who have never done Aya, this is what kind of tends to happen on that day 3. It was like a party, and my parents were there, my dad, my mom, my brother, and everyone's cheering me on. Everyone's wearing white, and they're flying with me. And literally I have the visions of, they're so excited for me and so happy for me, and I'm like with them. And literally it was just the best feeling in the world, because it was like, oh my gosh, they are rooting for me. They've always been with me. They're always there. I never have to think otherwise or think that I don't have their support, because they've always been there. And so that really kind of turned for me just like that, because when I got back to Chicago, I did all of the financials as I typically would, right? Good Asian girl with all of the skills, right? So like I planned out all of the financials for the business to sell my practice. And literally the Wednesday after I come back from Aya, I put my practice up for sale. And 6 months to that date, I sold my practice. I moved to the Bay Area, where I would then get into, Stanford nonprofit school of management to learn more about, the nonprofit at the time that I was running. And I then realized that I wanted to, invest in people and learn more about startups and, be a mentor for founders, which then led to, coaching startup founders and advising female-led startups. And so like everything changed within an instant. And also it began my journey of, the first question that you ask, authorship. Because that's when I started thinking like, okay, I could actually connect all of the dots from my past, all of the dots of everything that I had been born and raised with around the whole theme of grit and resilience, and really learn how people are making decisions from the stories that they're grown and brought up with, and the stories of their past that they don't have to take them with. And that literally led and opened the door to the next chapter of my journey, which was starting writing the book, Emotional Grit.
Wow. So many questions in all of that. So the first one is to tag on a second part to the question of the ghosts of your parents and also your brother, which I did not know about. What's their relationship like with you now? So specifically, yes, the parents, but I'd also like to hear about the brother and what's been like the lasting relationship or mark that he left on you.
Yeah, it's so interesting. DJ, he was the light of our family. He was the joy bringer. He was the mischievous, always funny guy. Like Three Stooges was a thing that we all grew up with. yes, very much a thing. And he was the bridge between my brother Vinay and I. And you've met my brother Vinay. And so, because DJ and I, he was my first BFF. Like, he was my buddy. We were like partners in crime. We were 16 months apart. People usually thought that we were twins because we totally looked alike. And yeah, I mean, when he transitioned, I mean, it was probably one of the most painful times of our life because, and I say it now, but there was just no way to even comprehend the amount of just overwhelming, awful, painful anguish and grief. And there was a time where it took me so long, probably even a decade. Even when I was doing a lot of speaking engagements around grief and confidence and all of the things that I would get asked to talk about, I wouldn't even bring that story up until probably the last, I want to say 5 years, 6 years. And so now my relationship with him has all been through joy, because honestly, and so many of our relatives, my relatives say that my son Ari, because he was actually born on the 13th of October, and it was 6 days after my brother had transitioned. So, in relation to those dates, right, it's just like a full circle moment where, you lose somebody. Obviously, I was much older because I lost him when I was, I lost him when I was 17. But everyone says that, Ari kind of resembles my brother DJ and all of his mannerisms and how, Ari shows up in the world full of joy, just this happy kid.
Super extroverted.
Will
not go to sleep if there's people over.
No, he won't.
Since he was like very little.
Since he was, yes. So that's DJ for you. Like, he was always running around, making people laugh. Like, that's just who he was. And for the longest time, because I honestly had to step up in a very interesting way when I was young and help raise my brother. And when it was just, Vinay and I started parenting the way that my dad was parenting me. I didn't know any better. So literally the joy was gone. And because DJ was such a bridge between Vinay and I didn't even know how to relate to Vinay. I definitely, we've healed a lot of our kind of brother sister, like ambiguous relationship trauma, because it was kind of like I was like his mother in many ways. And DJ was really the one that kind of held us together. And now that was gone, I had to step into this kind of like motherly role. And Vinay for years had so much resentment towards me because I was doing what I thought my dad wanted me to do, which was, all right, make him also become a doctor, dentist, get good grades and all of those things. Meanwhile, he's going through some of the most pivotal losses of his life at 14 years old. And so it was just a very different dynamic. And it wasn't until I started reconciling who DJ was and how he was just this life bringer, and that he was the life of, the party, the life of our house, that there's a little bit of us still in him.
I've got like so many, there's no way I can do all this in one interview. Now I've got so many branches here that I want to explore. But have you reflected on that you seem to be sort of a nexus for that type of personality that comes around you? Is that strange?
I mean, it totally makes so much sense. It's like he's always around. And I see him in honestly, in the people that, and some of my closest friends around me. It's like, oh, DJ's energy. Okay, because he was an Aquarius. His birthday was February 7th. And so
Jason Goldberg.
I know. It's crazy. And the fact that, and I've told Jason this too, that there's so much of my brother that's in him. It's uncanny. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so first branch I want to go down.
Okay.
When you first left the relationship and you got the courage to do that and the strength to do that, what was the internal monologue that you had to battle for, like, however long you had to battle that for afterwards? Like, what were you, when you said you went through healing and you did 3 years of healing and then Aya showed up, what was like the first year like?
Ooh, learning how to be alone. I remember I was, it was, first there was a lot of fear because I had to get a restraining order. I didn't know what even the first thing that you do when you are in a crisis like that. I had no idea. Thank God for one of my girlfriends and one of my guy friends at the time who really stepped up and really showed up for me. And they're like, you're not going home. My brother Vinay stepped up and he's like, I'm going to tell everyone in the family, or you are going to tell everyone in the family. You cannot keep this a secret. There's no way. And I needed to let go of my ego because I just wanted to protect everything. I wanted to wear a mask and like hide my truest feelings, literally going back into how I dealt with my grief, 10 years prior. And my brother was like, no, let everybody in. We have to tell you have to tell Bua, you have to tell, my other aunt, Mama Chi. And so that was the stage that I was in. So having really close friends that were really like, you're going to fall apart and it's okay. And I remember because, I was a dentist and I was talking to some of my dentist friends, my girlfriend, and I was like, I can't sleep. I mean, can you just prescribe me something? And she's like, Neeta, you are going to feel. You're going to feel and you're going to cry and it's okay. You're going to break down and it's totally okay. And this was like the first 6 months of like, oh my gosh. And when everything comes down in threes, right? And so my practice was thriving. It was growing at an exponential rate during this super crazy low point in my life. And there was a lot of things that I had to go through in terms of lawyers and lawsuits around that time that made me extremely fearful of things. And it questioned a lot of things for me in a way where I needed to say, you know what? I have to even let my staff in, my team in, because I had a team of 15. I had doctors, I had hygienists, I had assistants. And this was kind of where I didn't want to cry or break down in front of anybody. I would drive to my office every day. I remember I had my, big SUV. It was a BMW SUV. And I was literally spending an hour in my car just like sobbing and crying and just like in fear and shameful that people are going to judge me because I had this crazy breakup that was going on. And I lost my sense of self. Like, what am I doing this all for? What is this all for? And here I am having, one of the best months of my practice. And I'm like, please, everybody go away. Like, I can't even leave because I was the one doing everything. But it was also at a very significant time in my leadership of my career where I remember I had to bring everybody into the office, and there was I was going to court the next day, and there were some things happening that one of my, team members was embezzling from me. It was like all at the same time. And, it was just a really crazy dramatic time. And I had to say, listen, and I had to tell them, I said, I'm going through this divorce. And the thing is this person that I was married to was also a dentist. And so there were a lot of things kind of, entangled, as you would think. And I said, listen, if you don't want to work for me, just leave right now. But I cannot do this. I need a team that supports me. And for the first time ever in my life, I had the courage to say, if you're not going to work for me, then leave. Because I had such imposter syndrome about even owning my practice. That was like a different thing that I was actually going through, because I looked so young. I looked like an Asian protege, and
well, you just turned 24 now,
exactly,
right?
exactly. So it totally makes sense. But I didn't own it even back then. And I remember all of the therapy that I had started to get me so confident to even leave. I was in improv classes, honestly. And I had been seeing my therapist for years. And note to self, when your partner doesn't want to go to therapy with you, that's also a red flag. So when all of this kind of blew up in my face, it was the first 6 months that was not only the hardest because I kept moving for safety reasons, yet I remember going on like a mini getaway, just like to get out of like everywhere. First, it was at this resort where it was all focused on mental well-being, wellness, meditation, but it was all in the Red Rocks of Utah. It was next to Zion National Park. And it was my first time there, and I just fell in love. I'm like, oh, I've arrived. Like my soul, my nervous system finally was like, we've been waiting for you to come here and like tap into the energy of this like vortex in this field. And I just felt so held there. There was a meditation teacher that was like kind of either doing like a residency, or he was like one of the teachers there. And I just immersed myself fully in kind of like everything he was teaching. And that was honestly, even though I grew up with meditation and chanting from my dad, we would totally make it up, because we grew up kind of, he would be chanting on the weekends, like for 2 hours, sometimes 3-hour meditations on Sundays, especially when he was like praying for my mom. And we would totally make fun of it. I totally took that sort of lineage for granted until I'm back, in this like very spiritual vortex. And it's the first time I'm allowing myself to be guided and held. And there are these shamans there who were also, they were part of the Indian reservation, but they were also kind of talking about life path and just all of these concepts that I'm like, give me more. I want more and more and more. And it was like angels were coming to me in the form of guides and spiritual teachers, especially at this beautiful place. And one of the excursions at this wellness resort was going into Zion National Park, and you spent the entire day there. They had this whole meditation. Of course, you're doing yoga at the time, and you're just sitting among the energy of the Red Rocks. And it was like, oh, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. And so I knew it was in a place of just healing. And I remember I was with my cousin, and I'm like, I think I'm going to get a dog. And she's like, no, you're not. No, you need to be alone. You have not been alone for ever. Like ever. You have to do this for yourself. And it was such a battle for me because it was so hard for me to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, because it's the first time in my life that I couldn't put a veneer on anymore, because it was like the decade of trauma and loss and grief all just like came in a wafting like
because it's the first time you just sat with it.
Just sat. And I'm like, I can't plan anything. I'm not trying to get into college. I'm not trying to get into grad school. There's nothing for me to study for. Like, I have everything. My practice keeps growing. I'm like trying to shut it off. Like, I'm like, I just like, what am I supposed to do? And so I couldn't sleep it off. I just had to sit with this really profound stillness of, this is what the depths look like. And yeah, you can only plan for the next 10 minutes. What is going to happen tonight? Okay, maybe you're going to allow yourself to cry because tomorrow you might have to go into the courthouse, or tomorrow you might have to, battle another issue with some other team member leaving you. So it was just, it called on me on a different level of strength I didn't even know I had, as not only a leader, but it was also trusting into my intuition, which I totally gave away to everybody else my entire life. And so it was really cultivating that inner strength of, this time really sucks. And it's probably going to be the most miraculous and beautiful year of just exponential growth, because a year later, then yes, I was saying yes to all of these different books, so it was like I remember it was like reading 3 books a week, and then organizing what we would call like modern day masterminds of like women, professional women who were also doing the same thing. Cause I literally left the entire community that I knew with this person that I was with. And so recreating a community that were like-minded, that were also interested in the things that I was curious about. Like, I wanted to know how people made decisions and how smart people had more time to do the things that they loved and not be a slave to what I was at the time was my practice. And so in order to do that, I needed to hire coaches. I needed to hire consultants. I needed to hire people who would teach me how to be a better leader so I could empower them where I could step away, because I really wanted to go to that next conference. I wanted to go to that next, whatever it was, so that I could focus on my heart to heal. And whatever I needed to become in order to do that, so I could still, have revenue coming in on the side, I was all in for it. I was like, sign me up. And so, the first 2 personal coaches that I worked with, plus consultant on the business side of my practice, really allowed me so much freedom, because then everything after that, it was like everything fell into place there, so that I could go out and, take a month off and go to Bali, go to, have these spiritual retreats that then showed me more of what I was no longer kind of taking with me in this next chapter of my life.
So when people say the term healing, and this is not one of the branches I really want to go too far down, but I feel like I just need to patch this hole in the mental model I'm building, what you're teaching right now.
Yeah.
When you say healing and doing all of this work with these coaches and things, I'm visualizing like your heart, right? And in that heart, it was like at some point you decided, with all this grief, with all this overachieverness, with all of these things, I don't know about overachieverness, but achieverness, that you would patch that with temporary family, so like male affection. Mm-hmm. And that eventually led to this marriage, right? And then once that marriage kind of fell apart, you were like, oh, number one, there's no way I could take another person, because it's just, I'm in so much pain now, and there's nothing left to distract me, that I've got to somehow patch this or fill this or deal with this hole in here in some other way. And you were like, I have no idea what that other way is. And that is what results in a lot of the pain in the beginning of figuring out, like, okay, what goes there? Like, because it's relative, right? So you've never had anything else there, or maybe you did, but it was your mom, your dad, and DJ, and they're not there. So you're like, what goes here now? And that was part of the journey, if I'm hearing you correctly.
It's the self-love journey. It was the journey back to myself. And really...
So would you say when you were like building the practice and wildly successful with that, there was a big element of you that there was some non-acceptance or non-self-love going on?
So I was trying to be a man when I was in a very masculine man. The way I led was very masculine. The way that I showed up, it wasn't who I was at my core. The only time where I was at my, and not even to my patients, actually thinking now back into it, when I was building the success of the practice early on, before I hadn't left yet, it was all coming from a place of lack. Like, I have to prove. I don't know who I am. And that really had me attract a lot of energy leechers, people who weren't my people. They were just there because they you know, they were either there for kind of the wrong reasons, or they weren't like, it wasn't even easy.
And so in my understanding of this, so subconsciously you were attracting these people because they would give you more to prove.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And so the journey back to myself was coming from a place of pure authenticity and vulnerability and radical self-acceptance for who I was and how I was showing up. Yeah, I was 27, 28, 29. Yes, this is my practice. Yes, this is how I am. Yes, I'm going through a divorce. So all of the things that I was so ashamed about, so thinking that it was so awkward and something not to talk about, I started leading with. And when I started to lead with the things that I was so ashamed about that I wanted to hide from everyone, that's when the veneers came off. And that's when I started to attract people that are like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm going through a divorce too. Or, oh my gosh, I love what you're doing too. I love EDM music too. Let's play it for all of the patients. So it was like small steps like that helped me in really truly discovering who I was at my core, because I honestly grew up kind of like a chameleon. Like whatever, you know, this person wanted or this person wanted or this person wanted, sure, my boundaries weren't intact. It wasn't until going through that full-on awakening, like I said, it was earth-shattering, such a huge initiation for me into my own becoming of a woman that I loved and to date myself. So much so that I even married myself in Bali. I had a whole self-marriage, and we're going to get a little woo-woo for a second. I had a whole self-marriage ceremony, just reclaiming my unique expression and really honoring the love that I have for myself, and have it be a reminder every day that you put yourself first. Ajit sometimes doesn't really like that, you know, because he's like, did you divorce yourself yet? Because no, we're married and we're together. But it was such a beautiful reminder for me that going into this next phase of my life, I was always going to honor my truest value, whatever that was, and honesty was going to come first, because all those years I wasn't really honest, and I didn't really know who I was, and I was operating from a place, like I said, that it was dark, it was coming from lack. And so when your energy is emanating in those ways, you're going to attract people who are going to project the same kinds of things to you, like fear, like low energy vibes, a lot of, you know, taking, a lot of drama, until you begin to fully start to accept yourself radically and wholly for who you are, unapologetically, which meant that I had to say no to some of the friends that were no longer in that same energy vibration.
Yeah. So if there's someone watching right now and they're in a situation, or they know they've been in situations and they're continuing to recreate those situations, most notably if they're currently in it, is this something where do you have to hit the wall for this to really change? Like, it sounds like you did a lot and it was really extreme and it took years to really deal with it, and to move beyond it and accept it and all of that. For that person that's watching, is it just this will help them because they know that there will be an end when they hit the wall? Or can they do stuff now? Like, how does that, like, if someone had told you that all that was going to happen, I don't know if you would have just left, right? You might have needed to like hit rock bottom for this to work.
So with any sort of transformation and change, what I know now and what I've written in, you know, many of my books and even in personal transformation, we don't take action if things are easy. We just don't. We're complacent. We don't notice that we have And it's actually a concept that I'm writing about in my book, because now I've had, thousands of these conversations in the last decade, really. And in, kind of my research around this is, we don't take action when things are easy. We don't even take action when we are aware about something. We need to have literally a fall. So those of you who are aware that you are in a situation, you know that probably it's not going to get better. You know that it may be easier to stay where you are right now because you're so afraid of the other side. You're so afraid of uncertainty. And that's what majority of us are so afraid of. We're afraid of uncertainty. We're not going to know what's going to happen tomorrow. In those, 9 months of my life where, oh gosh, I was like praying, is this going to be over? Are we going to just be done with this divorce? Am I going to know if I'm going to be able to get some things of my house back, or should I just start building anew altogether? Like, it was just a lot of this turmoil of, I don't know. And I had to really surrender that time. And for you, anyone that's going through this, it is painful to not be in that control. And if you are in this and you're kind of like, okay, the fall is not a really bad fall right now, but you know that it's not going to get better, then what are you waiting for? Because after anybody has a fall, and it could be a diagnosis, it could be a health scare, it could be, a friend getting hit by a car. I mean, the pain has to be so great for somebody to then to be ignited, because the ignition is that second step. Okay, you're ignited to take action. You're ignited to take action on what you no longer can control. Can't control the other person. You can only control yourself. So are you going to allow yourself to continue to be in that experience? Or are you going to say, you know what, I am going to change my health. I am going to let go of that friend who doesn't honor me, who constantly puts me down, who doesn't value who I am. Or I'm going to let go of that relationship where I knew it needed to end 6 months ago, a year ago, but crap, I keep thinking that something's going to change. What is that ignition what is it going to take for you to ignite and make a decision like that? Most people will need that ignition, which is that fall.
Is there a way to do that that's more Satori versus Kensho?
I mean, if anybody is open to it, yes. But honestly, most people don't take action until things get so
in the
low.
Future, if there's someone who's like, I want the positive inspirational gas for change or ignition to change versus the painful kick to the pants change, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I would just take an inventory of your life right now. And, even if you are in somewhat of a fall, you don't like your job, you didn't get that promotion, your friends you found out were talking bad behind you, and you know that they're not the best for you. So these are moments of the fall where you can ask yourself a different question. Awareness and our radical self-awareness, when we ask ourselves, oh, well, should I be in this relationship? Do I really have to be in this job even though it's doing well for me seemingly, but I'm not really liking it? Those are some of the questions that, I asked myself even with leaving dentistry. Once you start to open yourself up to that awareness, that's when you start moving towards a different reality that you probably never even thought of, just because you're curious and you're operating from a place of curiosity instead of a place of reaction.
Okay. Next branch. Mm-hmm. So you sold your dental practice, you moved to the Bay, and you're like, I'm going to do startups. Now, earlier you mentioned you had some imposter syndrome of having like that practice, and there's also another branch there of this masculine feminine thing where you were like, doing business like a man in a very masculine way, and then you started to shift that by becoming more vulnerable and open with all the people that were working for you, and that really probably shifted the culture dramatically, and like you said, started playing EDM music and like all kinds of fun Neeta things, right?
Totally.
I'm presuming when you moved to the Bay Area there was massive imposter syndrome.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely.
Walk me. How did you?
Oh my gosh.
How'd you go from selling a dental practice to coaching startups? Like what?
So yeah, and when people ask that, they're like, "Wait, what?" So, I mean, I have to give context because while there was a period of probably 2 years when I was massively, growing my dental practice and I had dentists working for me. So it allowed me to step away. And, first I would test, okay, I'll step away and I'll only do 4 days a week. Then it was 3 days a week. Then it was like 1 week out of the month, right? And, we were still growing 20% year over year. And so I started to then do what anybody would do and start, dabbling in different ventures and endeavors. And this was when I think I mentioned I started what you would call like a modern day mastermind. And this was selfishly to really create a community of strong women, professional women. And I realized that we were all kind of going through, we were all still single. We didn't want to do like the bottle service at night, but we wanted to ask different questions. And I was obviously the curator of these groups because that's kind of been who I have always been. I'm kind of this gatherer of people. And every month we would just talk about these ideas. And also I had my nonprofit at the time, which I was doing more and more speaking engagements. And, getting people to then perhaps maybe sit on the board of the nonprofit, it started to introduce me to a lot of different kinds of people. Again, when you are aware and when you're radically self-aware of the reality that you want to get into, your reality just begins to change. So while I had this women's group and then I had...
Let me interrupt you with that. Yeah. Has there ever been a time, especially in the last, let's say 5-10 years, where you've been, really, really aware of yourself and you've been asking these questions for a long time now, where you do become aware of the reality you want to create and you can feel that you're blocking that energy of those things changing? Because like you said, even being aware that you want something, it will like little things will start to happen leading you towards that. And sometimes people can block those little things from happening or fight the flow of those things beginning. Do you find, when you find that happening, because it happens to everyone, when you find that happening, like what do you do?
I mean, I still operate from a place of curiosity, and I think that if we're talking about manifestation and, allowing things to come towards us, it's you have something in your mind, but you're really not attached to it. And, I think it's kind of, there's, I guess the example could be, all right, we said we were going to, do this interview and we've been talking about it for months, but it's not like we were, so steadfast on a date. Like it did happen. It didn't happen in those 2 weeks, but it happened in the next few months. Right. And so if you were like, oh man, Neeta, she snubbed me on this or have a different response to that, then of course, then we're blocking our own energy for it instead of just coming from a place of ease and flow and curiosity of like, okay, didn't happen now, didn't happen the next day, but at some point it's going to happen. And you're still going to be curious about even asking me like you did. You're like, okay, yes, let's do it this time. Let's do it this time. So I think as we sometimes self-sabotage ourselves for whatever reason, I think for, me in the context of, all of the places that I was able to go to and even start bridging a new reality for me, it was, all right, I'm going to ask different questions. So even in the women's group, it was like, okay, sometimes there were 10 people, but then it grew to over 100 people. And then I had somebody take that over and start, doing something else with it, because I learned that my personality, I like to start a lot of different things. And again, it takes a lot of self-discovery and ownership of like, yeah, that's who I am. And I'm unapologetic about it. And that's okay. So then I got introduced to a VC that will completely shift and change my whole view about startups and, venture capital, because this person was a venture capitalist, and actually brought me to, and again, when you're in a period of yes in your life, like I was with ayahuasca experience, I was in a period of yes in my life. And so they're like, hey, you're a female founder. This is what I was getting called as a female founder of a dental office. And I didn't even recognize that I was, but yes, I was. And they're like, come to South by Southwest. And I was like, what's that? Like, never heard of it, and by the way, we're recording this around South by right now. So it's very apropos and just
in
like
Austin.
Full circle moment. But this was 8 years ago. And what was this was 8 years ago.
Wow. So you were 14.
Yeah, I was 14.
You keep getting younger.
But it blew my mind away. It blew my mind on every single level, because never before had I ever been exposed to that many startups, founder scene, just, and really recognizing the leadership skills that I saw in so many people, especially the women. And they were pitching their, startups just like that, getting funding, and I'm like, wow, they're not validated by the right answers, coming from a person that was only trained in medicine and dentistry, working in millimeters. So I'm like, oh my gosh. And I get this like zest for life, literally, because
I don't necessarily like want to like toot your horn too much, but the fact that you were able to build such a big practice and sell it and like systemize it without friends, that like without the connection to that community, the community that we like operate in now, is mind blowing. That you were able to build that without exposure to all that mindset and that thought, where like everybody we know now is like, how do we hire this team and how do we systemize everything, right? Like Eric Strauss is in the other room, like, so the fact that you're able to do that and then get exposure to all that information and knowledge and books and people, and it is mind blowing.
Yeah, I think it was a beautiful time. It was a really tough time, personally, professionally, in all the ways, but it was definitely a period of immense growth on so many levels. And it's literally, what I talk about for so many of you who are like, how can I go from one career to the other? And you're thinking, how could I go from your day job to whatever I want to do next? And I don't even know what I want to do next. And how do I know what I want to do next? Say yes to those opportunities that present itself. Say yes to a crazy weekend at South by, even though you're, in your mind, you're probably not going to invest in these companies, but maybe there's going to be different conversations. Get out of your environment of where you traditionally are hanging around with. Like, my community was all dentists, doctors. They were talking about
golfing on the weekend. Yes,
or on Wednesdays when you didn't see patients. And I was like, no, there's more to this. And I was serving on panels, being a startup advisor to these women-led startups, because then I got exposed to that VC. The VC sat, as a venture capitalist in a few incubators in Chicago. I wanted to get better at speaking. And so I'm like, okay, I'll sign up for this pitch training event. I'm not pitching a startup. I have my nonprofit. And so I'm going in there thinking I'm like this, transformational speaker, and I'm sitting with 30 investors. And I'm the only one that has like a nonprofit. They're like, why are you doing this? Like, what are you don't have a business. You're not raising money. I'm like, well, kind of, for my nonprofit. And they're like, but people were so curious because I was the only, female that had, obviously this very unique story, but positioning and championing women and girls. And guess what? All of these VCs, most of them were male. Actually, all of them were male. They all had daughters. Oh, they were very curious at the information. And they're like, okay, we would invest if you were going to create something. How can we help you? And so I took that as an opportunity to ask more questions. Tell me how you invest in companies. What is it that you do? Tell me about the founders you invest in. How, so it was just very much different conversations. And I remember then some of them became my, mentor. I remember Larry Abrams. He was, to this day, shout out to him, just fascinating in my exposure to that world coming from a VC mindset. So much so that he brought me in to actually coach a lot of these founders that he was investing in. And he's like, we actually need what you're doing. And this was before I even had my book, Emotional Grit. It was just the beginning of me even interviewing people to see how they master grit situations in their life before I even came up with the acronym for my first book, Grow, Reveal, Innovate, Transform. And so then jumping ship, when I got to the Bay Area, I already had my connections from, the Chicago VC, I guess you can say, world, and the incubators there, because I was part of this pitch fest. And what was interesting then for me was continuing the same conversation. So while I was there, I would interview close to 500 leaders from all different walks. And that began my journey of becoming an author, because I wanted to understand how the mindset of founders work.
500?
Yes.
Over what period of time?
Oh gosh, I sold my practice in 2015. I did this for a year.
So you're doing multiple per day?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no. And it was not just, it wasn't just like sitting down with people. It was also spreadsheet, Excel sheet, giving you a survey to fill out. And then there were only some that I was actually sitting down with and getting full elaborate conversations with to be, to put in my book. And so Emotional Grit was totally positioned for leaders, executive leaders, top leaders. And that's kind of how it literally bridged the gap for me to then get into leadership coaching.
Oh my gosh, incredible. So walk me down a little timeline of the book journey. So you had Emotional Grit was book number 1.
I was in 2016.
Yes. Book number 2.
Book number 2, the Book of Coaching, that was in 2017.
And that was a collab?
That was a collaboration with Ajit. Yes, that was a collaboration with Ajit. We wrote it for 10 days. And a lot of the things that I've done in collaboration, it's always been around, emotional health, right? Kind of the mentality and the mindset of a founder, of an entrepreneur. And that's really my jam. That's my sweet spot, because we all have these beliefs in ourselves, whether it's imposter syndrome, which is what I totally suffered from. And what I recognized was, hey, if I interview all of these people and I get their stories, I don't feel so much of an imposter because they're all feeling it too.
Yeah. Well, and again, you must have realized like what you built was actually much harder to build than a lot of like our entrepreneur world.
Oh, yeah. Which is like that sort of sweat equity. I mean, I'm so grateful for my time building a dental practice and for my colleagues who are now just purchasing practices. Like I purchased mine 2 years out of school. Those were some really tough years of not knowing what the heck you're doing. I didn't get an MBA. I mean, my street cred was my early stage upbringing of having to hustle and working 3 jobs and managing everyone's mindset at a young age. And that's kind of what I carried on,
Did Dr. Horrible help you?
He, like I said, he stood as like a kind of, this silent, just person that was a very accepting part of who I was. Yeah.
And so as you bought your practice, what was his whole take on that?
So he was not in the picture when I actually graduated dental school. So I think I stopped working for him probably in my early 20s, like maybe even right when I got into dental school. And so after dental school, I worked for several different operations. So government run operations so I can get my speed up with dentistry. And then I was so fascinated about cosmetics and the aesthetics and the beauty again, because of my love of arts, right? And that sort of expression. And so that's really what I loved. And I wanted to bring that because I thought that was such a fun part of dentistry, and I wanted to do more of that. So I started studying a lot more of the cosmetic side, and also having conversations with people who are better than me as a surgeon that I could just hire, that we could have a well-rounded, practice in that way. So
I've so many tangents popping up here. So what was book number 3?
The Business Book of Coaching. So a big part of our business is training coaches to become better coaches, essentially. And
to clarify, how many businesses do you have?
Oh, wow. So I like to say that I'm an investor, and I have my hands in I like to do a lot of collaborations now in this stage of my life, because now, as a mama of 2, I totally love the idea of celebrating and creating with other people that have amazing talent, and we bring to the table in a collaboration that, we are creating impact in different ways, mostly around, the themes and the verticals I love to go into is mental health, of course, emotional health. These are all the things that, light me up. And what I specifically bring is curriculum development, seeing kind of the operations, the marketing flow, and now we have teams that kind of go in and do a lot of the implementation. And so, right now I would say we have 5 projects on the floor right now, which is really exciting. And so the 2 verticals is really on coach training and creating programs and certifications around coach training, with the element of, mental health and emotional health for founders. And that's really what it is.
Yeah. And I feel like, and I'm going to put some words in your mouth and you tell me if this is right or wrong.
Yeah.
Your healing journey, you said you hired at least 2 coaches that probably helped that helped dramatically,
but
right?
The first 2 really helped me shift my view of business and my business acumen more than any sort of, MBA would.
And then you interviewed 500 leaders and then became an executive coach after having spoken with them and done all this research in the startup world and what worked and what didn't work. And of course, bringing your own experience through building your practice and then sort of automating your practice, right, to run without you, and then eventually selling it. So you had so much experience with that whole at least 3-year period is what it sounded like, in addition to going through this whole healing journey, which sounded just as difficult as doing everything you had to do with your practice, so that
that was a 5-year journey when I sold my practice from the time that I got divorced. Yeah, it was a full 2016.
So I'm finally putting it together.
Yeah.
Like why you're so in the coaching space is like, oh, because if you didn't have coaching, you may not be here right now. It would be a very different world.
1,000%. And coming from a background of, immigrant parents, I think that, a lot of times you're not able to have that conversation. You're not able to have that open, non-judgmental conversation where you have to lie about everything and or can't, talk back to your parents, and my parents, they were great. They did the best that they could. And I'm honestly so grateful for them. And, did I wish my dad would just have these conversations with me about boys, so I didn't have to lie and go behind his back, and he even knew what I was doing. And it was like, goodness. And now that we get to train, people that look like me, who probably also have the same struggles growing up with immigrant families, of not being able to have anybody to talk to or listen to or to be heard or to be seen. That's one of the reasons why I'm for one of our businesses, Dharma Coaching Institute, we partnered up with, an incredible talent, Sahar Rose. And the reason why is because the 3 of us are brown, myself, Ajit, and her. And for us to bring this back to a community where, they don't get to live on their purpose a lot of the time because they have to do family obligations or respect their elders or all of the things that go along with it, that we're going to change that, we're going to change the narrative where we're empowering more people to then coach themselves, but also have an earlier healing journey to forgive their past, forgive their parents, have different relationships, have different conversations even. And even, to the men that I dated who also didn't have those relationships with their parents because of the same reasons. Because they were also from these ethnic backgrounds that probably emasculated them, didn't hear them, only praised them when they were doing well in school, and or just took the power away from them where they felt that they needed to prow on, women. I hope we're going to be changing the narrative with a lot of the work that we're doing in the coaching space. That's that's obviously my mission, because we just don't get to have that. And now there's a whole generation growing up that we get to change the narrative for. So that's why I'm really excited about it.
That's awesome. So then let me ask you a big question, which is, so you get into a relationship with this amazing man, right? who was probably like highly valued, right? We could say that, in his community. Mm-hmm. I presume there must have been so many things that came up for you in the beginnings and pre-marriage of that relationship, right?
Oh, yes.
So walk me through that. Like, how did you...
So I was celibate for quite a few years. And then I was seeing so many different healers, and there was a time where all of my chakras were blocked. And especially my first and second chakras. And this was when I was traveling everywhere.
And can you explain what that feels like?
And so it just felt like I was friend zoning every single guy that I would meet because I was too afraid to let them in. And I thought, I was like, oh, they're great. Why am I not attracted to them? Oh, it's because I friend zone them so that it feels safe for me to be around them, because I won't have to think of maybe awkwardness or anything, because honestly, I'm not fully ready for a relationship yet. Those were the things that I was probably not ready to deal with at that time. And so instead, everyone was a friend, and even my energy was very different. It was very closed off. But then I would say, okay, yeah, I'm looking for love, or, and then I'd be like, well, why am I not? So there's so many stories around that. But specifically, in meeting Ajit, we met at an event at A-Fest, and this was, oh boy, I want to say it was around the same time. It was like 8 years ago. And this was, 8 years ago, I believe. And I was just getting out of the marriage. And again, I was completely closed off. And he was in his own relationship. He was actually married at the time, was very newly married. And so we just said hi, but there was, nothing to it. It was just, oh, you're part of the A-Fest community. And, that was pretty much it, right? Because you're A-Fester, right? Everyone's like hanging out together and everyone's friends. And so I even remember some of my really close guy friends saying, you were so closed off that year. Did you realize that? And I was like, yeah, actually I was. And I was also on this different journey that I was like looking for girlfriends. And I was so blown away by everyone having these like international online-esque businesses. And I'm like, wow, here I am with a brick and mortar. I'm like so fascinated, right? So fast forward to then when I actually did my self-marriage in Bali. This was in 2015, 3 months before my practice sold, or that I sold my practice. And I began to start to, open myself up to love. I met Ajit again, and this time, after Bali, I went to, KL in Malaysia to see our friends from Burning Man and and A-Fest. And this was when he was coming out of his relationship. Again, it was like, oh, he's such a cool dude, great. Again, I totally friend zoned him. And then a year later, I was asked to speak at, this is when I was in between probably going to move from San Francisco to Singapore, and I was going back and forth to Delhi. And I got asked to, with, you know, the VCs that I know, actually be part of this kind of incubator where I would be coaching the founders in Delhi. So I had to go back and forth, and I was actually doing a speaking gig in India, and Ajit was also speaking at the same event. And so I was basically in that part of the world, Malaysia, Singapore, you know, in that part of the world. And I was also finishing my book. And so then in 2016, he had asked, and he was also going through, you know, leadership challenge at that time. And I was already coaching leaders in that space because I was already in that area. And so he said, hey, why don't we do, you know, deep dive? You can also finish your book here. And you know, this is kind of where we then began this like work relationship in this way. And so, and
perfect on Ajit's end.
Right.
Perfect.
And yes. So he has two forms of the story that he tells. So, and so, you know, for the friends listening, it was,
wow, he just went right through the armor. Just like a quick little dodge.
But honestly, I set my boundaries, and I was so clear with my boundaries. And I said, okay, if, you know, there's going to be a work relationship, like, you know, this is going to be a work relationship. Like, keep everything over there in your pants.
Yep. Good luck with that.
Yeah. So, and I was so keen on that. And he was like, oh, okay. So you know, we can't just do like an offsite in Thailand. And he tells the story too in a different way. And I'm like, no, I don't work that way. Like, we can do it, you know, here we'll block off like 5 hours or 4 hours or whatever it is, and we'll go through everything. And so he had a lot of big, you know, challenges in his leadership at the time. He was CEO at the time of the company. And then after our time together, he realized like he needed to, you know, start his other venture, which became one of the companies that we have now called EverCoach. And so I honestly, because I was in such a different mode, I was also leading with the sense of, you know, while I'm writing this book, I'm like, I also want to allow love in my life. And I'm meeting so many amazing people, but I'm just not feeling the spark. And so, and I was asking, you know, a friend, like, you know, because you poll your guy friends and your girlfriends, and they're like, have you ever realized like you're, because I had a huge spreadsheet at the time, and I had a rating system.
Oh my gosh.
Of like,
okay,
so,
Neeta.
Yes, I know. Note to self, don't merge, you know, business with your love life. Yeah, because it's not, you know, quantifiable at all. And I had all of these different characteristics listed on the side, and I would rank them from 1 to 10. And Ajit never made that list at all. For whatever reason, he just never made the list. But I was like, why is it that I'm meeting all these people? And I'm like, gosh, Ajit and I are like great, and we have great conversations, but yeah, he's just a friend. And, you know, I think the real reason that I had to reconcile, and I went to another plant medicine ceremony that would really kind of blow my eyes open to, and this was a San Pedro ceremony, and it was in Bali, and it was 2 weeks before my manuscript was due for Emotional Grit, and I was going through just like another upheaval of things, and I wrote in my intention, you know, what is my next chapter to look like? And this is a very, you know, San Pedro is a very healing plant medicine. And for me, what came up was just, you know, second chapter was it wasn't about my book at all. It was all about, you know, a family and love. And I broke down because it was, you know, it was like, oh my gosh, like it was Ajit. And I was totally like, it was like he was a no from the get-go. And the reason why I pegged him in that way is because I had trauma around, you know, Indian men. And so I never even thought it was a possibility until it was, you know, revealed to me in this plant medicine ceremony that oh my gosh, you're not fully healed, because my ex-husband was Indian. And so there was yet another healing thing that kind of was revealed to me, and that I had to reconcile with and like make peace with, that, oh my goodness, this is the reason why I'm not even giving this person a chance. And so anyone who's listening who experiences some of those same triggers, like I didn't even realize that was a trigger until my eyes were opened to it, and you can't unknow that. And so being able to recognize that and just make peace with it and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to challenge myself, and I am going to just put myself out there, because if I want somebody to be vulnerable and honest, I should be vulnerable and honest with the person that I'm perhaps maybe open to. And so I actually led the conversation after I had closed it off, shut him down completely. And, you know, we were at the speaking event, and I had said, you know what, about that thing you asked me about like 2 months ago? Sure. And so the rest is history. Wow. And then we stopped coaching together because conflict of interest, of course.
Yeah. So I'm so curious, like, so you're like, okay, we could do that offsite in Thailand or whatever it is, right? That's what you were referencing?
Oh, well, yeah. Like,
yeah, something.
So, yeah.
Right. Some trip together as like romantic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So was it like, you were like, after that San Pedro ceremony, it was like done, and like you went on that trip with him or whatever, and it was just smooth, and you were like open to love, or were there still obstacles?
Oh, there were totally still obstacles. It was, you know, I think the thing that I needed to be okay with, and for me it was challenging myself to be very honest, transparent, and vulnerable. So at every single step. And I think because what was shown to me was, okay, this next chapter, like I want to start a family. And so when, as women, we get that in our heads, for me, it was like, okay, I don't want to rush into, you know, anything. I don't want to scare this guy either. Like, but I also want to honor the fact that, hey, if Ajit's not really, you know, interested in kids, well, I want to be very open and honest with him that this is not a season of my life that I want to like play around. What I was open to was exploring the opportunity with him, but I wasn't going to be attached to it. And I think that was, you know, at every step of our relationship, because we started out as, you know, friends, we started talking about all the things that, you know, that didn't go well in our first marriages, because he was also married as well. And so he was also going through his own healing journey about him in relationships in the season of life that he was in. He was in a full dating spree and trying to figure out how he wanted to be in relationship. And so, and, you know, we were on the same value system of like, okay, this is what we wanted. This is what we were open to. He was actually in the process of moving to San Diego. I was in the process of literally setting up residency and shop in Singapore. So I'm like, well, maybe this is just going to be a summer thing, and we'll just, you know, our paths would cross. And he was doing an event in San Diego, and he's like, oh, maybe you can come there. And so we were just kind of like seeing each other at these different, you know, points. I had to go teach something in Malaysia for a company. And so
that might have been the event where I met you, the one in San Diego. Did you go with?
I went, was that the first ever Coach Summit?
Well, there was an Extraordinary Summit in 2016. Mm-hmm. Then there was the first, I don't remember what it was called back then, but Mind Valley Reunion in 2017 in September.
Yep. So I was there at
and that's when we sat down and we met.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we launched launched that Mind Valley certification, that first one. Yes. We were all on stage. Yeah, that was
So that was in that period of time? That was a year later.
Well, that was a year later. That's when we were already.
Okay.
We were.
So it was not a summer
together.
fling. Yeah.
No, it was definitely not a summer fling, because like the first few months were like, okay, we're going to explore whatever this looks like. And then I think at every single stage, we were so cognizant of checking in with each other at every stage. So at the end of the summer, it was like, Where are we at now? At the end of the fall, where are we at now?
Wow, I have so many questions about that.
Yeah.
But to be respectful of our time, like I know we've been talking for a long time,
We've been talking for a while.
I have a lot of more questions. But the question that's burning for me right now is like, if we fast forward, obviously, like, great relationship. You have 2 children for now, and hi Ajit. I'm just gonna keep shouting them out with that. What are the most, and this is for everyone that's watching and me, who wants to build, for everybody that wants to build like a beautiful partnership, what are the things that he does as your husband and that he did as a boyfriend and a fiance that were just really wonderful for you, that really made you feel safe? And like, what did he do? What and to this day, what does he do that is really wonderful for you?
So I think in relationship, because now we would be married, like, is it 5 years now? I think it's 5 years. So I think in relationship, what we do so well and what he does and what he's done from day one is to be so curious about me. And this, he is the true coach in every sense of the word. He comes from a long lineage of coaches, but what I appreciate so much about him is, he doesn't try to coach me, but what he does is he just asks like it's the first time. And, and every single time it's like, just revisiting, like, oh, is this how you want to do something? Or what would you like for dinner? And even though he knows kind of like my staples, every single time he's operating from a lens of, this is the first time I'm just getting to know Neeta, because in every moment you can evolve. And he's always saying, okay, we're constantly evolving humans. So to think you're just like whatever you were yesterday is it's not fun. And so in this way, we keep things spicy, keep things fun, and we keep things like ever evolving, because it's not just like, he doesn't take anything for granted. And there's so much gratitude and appreciation. And the big word that I want to share here is inquisition. Like, there's so much inquiry. And so even we had a date night yesterday. And so, we're like, every year of our relationship, we kind of choose certain themes, right? And so this year it was all about creating, because now there's 2 children and there's lots of businesses and life, and having 2, easily relationships can get lost in translation. But what he still does is, and you would never think, or anybody who follows him or sees him, that he has the most wicked sense of humor, or that he's, funny as heck and he's so goofy. But he brought that from day one. And that just allowed me to be silly and goofy. And he just has this persona that's, that of course not everybody gets to see, because he has to wear this hat of like, coach all the time. Although I constantly say, I'm like, you should totally bring that out, because people really love that about you. And so yeah, so not only in the season of life are we still, playing with certain themes. So like this year, it's exploration and sensuality. Like, what are the things that we can do that, yes, we have sexy time and everything like that, but, creating an experience of play, curiosity, wonder, just within ourselves that maybe we've forgotten, or, you kind of lose touch because of the regular mundane things. And he's just been so good. So like yesterday, we basically worked out and we had like pool time and a date, and we were playing Uno poolside at, this hotel here in Austin. And it was like, and these are some of the things that we used to do, but it's just like different ways to connect. And sometimes it's, you have blindfolds and there's like, a mix and magic of different things that you're going to be able to do. And sometimes it's playing pickleball, right? And so each of us have now, for this year, at least what we're playing around with, and who knows, maybe life will get in the way and we won't continue. But right now what we're really intentional about is every month we take different turns in who's planning the experiences. So one of them is an experience, one of them is, you know, a sensual experience, and then one of them is connection. So connection could be, you know, playing things like pickleball or even just Uno poolside, right? But we're connecting and we're also, you know, having that. So this month is his month to do that.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask, as a boss mama.
Yes.
Are there times where he's like, oh, date night's we're gonna leave at 2 p.m. and you're like, whoa, I've got like things to do, and you have like impatience around these things?
Oh gosh, yes, it happens. It happens, but I think the and we both do this because, you know, there's launches and there's this and something's due, or oh, I forgot to do this, and we've got to have, there's boundaries that both Ajit and I have been so, like, you have your agreements for your agreements around these experiences. So if the experience, we've already agreed that this experience is going to be from, I don't know, 4 to 10 every Thursday. Usually it's every Thursday, essentially. And we knew that this Thursday wasn't going to be that because we have friends coming in town, etc. And so he said, okay, it's going to be Tuesday. And so those agreements were already had. So sometimes it'll be, oh, something happened, or, you know, and so it's rare because we both have this respect and reverence for our private time. I mean, and we're like really good about it probably 80% of the time. I would say 20% of the time if we childcare issues or whatnot, but yeah, 80%, you know, 80-20 rule.
Cool.
I'll take 80.
So final big question for you.
Yeah.
On the flip side, what do you believe that you've noticed as a girlfriend, fiance, wife has been like tremendously valuable in calling out the best man he can be?
Ooh. Yeah. So I think for me, in seeing the beauty in Ajit is constantly celebrating him. And, you know, I can say this recent example of, like, because our work is so in with personal growth, and this is kind of like our life, right? But we're human at the end of the day. We're going to falter as humans. I think the big thing for me that I've realized is, even if like it's like, oh gosh, he didn't wash the dishes, you know, I still go into the state of just gratitude, because it's just for me thinking like, oh man, I know so many women who don't really have this sort of partnership, or don't really have, you know, some of the things that we are able to create in our relationship. And I think it's so easy to go into criticism mode, especially when you have so many different layers together. For myself, it's remembering the top 3 things that I love about him no matter what. And it's his goofiness, and it's no matter what, you know, like he'll always crack a joke, which is what, like, because it, you know, anytime you use humor, and if you're not funny in your relationship, go and take a stand-up class, like play around with your silliness, like tap into that, because it totally shifts the energy immediately. And this has been the greatest thing as parents, because sometimes it could get so serious with like babies and even baby making and all of the things. Like, just drop into, you know, the silly mode, the silly factor. And we literally get into, you know, now that we have the kids, it's like, okay, tickle fights, and tickle fights turn into cuddling. And we know that oxytocin is huge and also shifts the state, right? So because we know all of this, like we have all of the tools. And I think it's, you know, the second thing is so it's the humor for sure. The fact that I can always bring it back to gratitude with him instantly, and what I love about him. And, you know, the third thing is we're always trying to ask for feedback. And even to this day, and this has been a ritual we've been doing probably for the last 4 years, is, you know, what are your 3 big wins? every single day before we go to bed, even if we're, like there's something that, there's an annoyance or we were so tired. I want to say like 80% of the time we're still asking, okay, what's your 3 big wins? And I'm not saying the 3 big wins for your day, but it's like pointing out, well, what were some of the magical moments in the day? And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, we were able to get like eye contact together.
That's awesome.
During dinner, we touched each other, when the kids went to sleep. So just keeping it simple, but to have those rituals and tools that you are able to cultivate with your own partner, I think those are sacred. And for us, that's so sacred.
Beautiful. I have a million other questions, but for now, when people watch this and they fall in love with you, how do they learn more? Where do they go?
Ooh, yes. Visit me at IG, Neeta Bhushan. I'm always there. And of course, you can listen to all of our, adventures on the Brave Table.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Oh my gosh.
For enduring my round of questions.
Wow, such an honor. You're so great, Skip. So honored to be in your orbit.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming.
I can do anything. This is my stage.